That item is passed. That brings us on to item 8 on the agenda, application for minor development, Peaks Farm Station Road. Mr. Moss, pages 49, 58 of your agenda pack.
Thank you. So the application seeks planning permission for a new Slurry Lagoon, Peaks Farm in Honolulu. So the application site is located on Station Road. It's located to the southeast of the main part of the village. It's highlighted in red on this location plan in the centre. So this is the site plan for the proposal. The buildings shown to the north are existing buildings which make up the main part of the farm. And the lagoon, as shown in red, would be positioned to the south of these buildings. So the buildings to the northeast and east are residential properties. The nearest of which is the one nearest to the top middle centre, is approximately 100 metres away from the proposed lagoon. So the Slurry Lagoon itself would measure 100 metres by 40 metres and will be surrounded on sides by a 0.9 metre high raised earth bank and a 1.2 metre high safety fence. And a floating cover would be used to cover the surface of the lagoon. So here's a photo taken from the east of the site, facing towards the position of the lagoon. The similar photo there as well. So we've received objections from the parish council and from local residents regarding a number of issues, with a particular focus on noise, odour, highways impact, flooding, and errors in the details submitted for the application. The application is to be supported by a noise and odour assessment, which were reviewed by the council's environmental health team, who confirmed they've raised no objections to the proposal. However, given the additional comments received by residents, we felt it's appropriate to approach the health team for again further comments. They've confirmed again that they still raised no objections to the proposal, but they have suggested that additional conditions can be used to further safeguard residents from the development. These conditions are covered in the supplementary report. So, with regards to flood risk and potential pollution of nearby water sources, the site falls within flood zone 1, so it's at the lowest risk of flooding, but part of the site does fall within a low risk area of surface water flooding, which is a risk between 0.1% and 1% chance of the year of surface water flooding. So issues related to potential pollutants into water sources are covered by legislation set out by the Environment Agency. Matters of surface water flooding is covered by legislation set out by the Lead Flood Authority. But in this case, subject to conditions recommended by the Environmental Health Team, it's considered that any harm from odour and noise can be mitigated, and the visual impacts of the proposal are not considered to be significant. The application is therefore brought to the committee with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Charles. And before we proceed any further, just to remind members of the supplementary report with the revised recommendations on page 55 of the agenda pack related to this application. Now, I have no speakers that want to support the application, but I've got 3 speakers that are objecting, and I'll take these in order of we'll have more Councillor Jill Whitmore first, followed by Parish Councillor James Stevenson, and then finally neighbour Mrs. Wyatt. So if Councillor Jill Whitmore would like to approach the committee, please, you may press them when you're ready, pressing the button in front of you.
Excuse me, Chair, I have got some for as well. I've been speaking to residents today. I've got proposals for and proposals for against.
Okay, that's fine. Would you like to address the committee?
Okay, Chair. I'd like you to consider the following objections to this planning application. The current location sites of Slurry close to residential properties and the watercourse that runs into the River Lee, and furthermore into Mayford Broad, which has been polluted before by that. So we're asking, will there be a warning system to alert people regarding leaks from the slurry? There are serious concerns about the methane and carbon dioxide emissions, and we want to ask, has there been a wind rose reports done on this? And if so, will the site be monitored yearly if the application is passed? And were any alternative location looked at when we were thinking about the planning away from the residential areas? And want to ensure that the walls and the base should be impermeable to the liquid being held in the slurry and should be sited in low permeable soils or on an artificial lining. Has this been checked? That is against. Now I've got a couple that I've been speaking to today for the application, and they're saying there will be less traffic down Station Road as now the waste will be stored in the slurry. At the moment it's spread on the land and there's more tractors going down there, which won't be when it's stored in the slurry. And the farmer needs slurries by law. And if the farm meets all the regulars stated in the 11 regulations that have come out today, they are saying there's no reason for the objection to be going for it. And that's the case, for and against.
Thank you, councillor Whitmore. You may return to your seat. Now call upon Mr. James Stevenson, Chair of Main Parish Council.
Chair, I think my clerk has inadvertently put the wrong name down, which has been Councillor Hopkin. I can speak, but I'll be ad-libbing, whereas he's actually prepared for it.
Okay, I'll take that on that basis then. Mr. Lampkin, you've got 5 minutes to address the committee.
Good evening, Chair. Mr. Committee. My name is Chris Hopkin. I'm a member of the planning group of Maidley Parish Council, which deals with planning applications within the borough. I'm also an honorary resident. Having carried out a site inspection after the application was made, together with the applicants and borough councillors Simon White and Gary Wood, who of course now left the authority. This was then followed by a visit to the home of Mrs. Wyatt, one of the objectors, and it was then that the parish council decided to object to the application on the basis of the paucity of information, re noise and odour pollution, and the absence of an effective Plan B from the applicants. Clearly, there's been an 11th hour change in the conditions that now to be imposed, as we've been advised, but we haven't had time to consider those, and indeed we don't even have full details of what they are to be. Notwithstanding the new situation, we decided to let you know the parish council's view generally on the application itself. It is acknowledged as the farm grows, the herd grows, and with Onley being in a nitrate vulnerable zone, there has to be a facility whereby the extra slurry produced can be dealt with. Although it seems to me a large enclosed silo would be a preferable way of dealing with the slurry, the applicant prefers a slurry lagoon. That's his choice. But to me, a silo would be infinitely preferable, as a slurry lagoon is at a far greater risk of leakages, and the slurry has to be manually stirred. There are details in government sites as to how dangerous these slurry lagoons can be, with various deaths of people falling into. The problems are the lagoon's location, with the risk of pollution to the watercourses, coupled with the risk of what is in effect a tarpaulin cover capable of being ripped. There have, as Councillor Whitmore has said, been previous cases of pollution from this farm site, where ultimately dozens, if not hundreds, of fish were killed in Maidley pools some 10 or 12 years ago. The proposed site, adjacent to the existing farm facilities, is also close to the tributary to the River Lee that wends its way to the pool, and also close to residents' property. I find it surprising that Onley has said not to be a flood risk. Before this application was made, I have in the past negotiated with your own chairman here regarding the flood risk in his position within the county council. Indeed, the residents most at risk from this application still have sandbags on their property boundaries. Although only a few residents are potentially affected, if a Plan B alleviates that, it should be seriously considered. It won't necessarily reduce the noise pollution, but a site up and over the hill 100 metres from where the applicant proposes siting the lagoon would be preferable both from leakages to the tributary and its greater distance from residents, who really should be the prime consideration. A further potential option, Plan C, could see a slurry lagoon sited to the northeast of the site, across Station Road, up to the hill in the direction of Bar Hill, where there are no water courses or residential properties. Our other concerns are noise from vehicles accessing and exiting the site for up to 16 hours per day, and the dust and other materials that will be in the atmosphere, which themselves will be detrimental to health. Station Road is already traversed dozens of times per day by tractors and trailers from this site, which to my eye seems to have increased, which I would submit can only increase further. I know Mrs. White and her husband have details of the activity around the lagoon cover and have produced a large amount of statistics in relation to this and many other aspects of this application, which each provided in a report form. As I said, the parish council is not against such development. It is the logistics of it to ensure that the minimum disruption to residents is caused. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. You may return to your seat. Thank you. Lastly, we have Mr. Jane Wyatt, who's also objecting to the proposal. Come on, take a seat, please. For 5 minutes, like everybody else, 4 minutes, you'll be reminded you've got a minute left. You may start when you're ready, press the button in front of you.
There are many better locations that do not risk a catastrophic pollution risk to Madeley Conservation Pond and to residents, and could even be cut directly out to the G5. There are substantial reports on the portal from myself and my husband that are raising about 30 or 40 issues regarding this, most of which have been brushed over by the report by the planning officer. Floodwater runs off the clay down from Bonnie Hall, where this lagoon is proposed, and flash floods this area. Planning have harmed us a great deal by making this mistake before of stating we are not in a flood area. So many apologies from councillors and from highways are flooding us for 5 years and causing me to have a nervous breakdown. 100 sandbags and flood gates, water keeping us up at night. We have photographs which we offered to planning of the flooding all around this area, including in the paddock where this lagoon is proposed. Planning has regularly been able unable to enforce conditions at this farm, and after several years of trying the farm applied to have them lifted, and planning supports it. I hope to show you that proper review has failed here, as has due process. Odour, air quality and noise issues cannot be properly addressed, therefore nor can the impact on residential amenity. Substantial reports have been submitted which call into question much of the farm figures the planning officer report relies on. Many greatly disparate with real life experience with no substantiation, and having ignored requests from Environment Protection to validate. For example, the farm has repeated noise nuisance complaints. The silent farm noise report you see in this application is paid and organised for by the farm. It's not in any way representative of reality. Failures in due process. We were not notified through the Borough Council system when major alterations to the application were uploaded, despite on asking being assured by the planning officer we would be informed as interested parties, given it was several months later and fundamental changes in the application detail. Had interested parties been alerted, we would have pointed out that the issues raised by the Environment Protection Manager, Environment Health, who objected, had not been satisfied at a material level before reports were delivered, and we would not be in this situation. Major staff difficulties at Environment Protection resulted in an inadequate EP response that failed to meet the requirements of the EP's manager's objection to this proposal. He is not currently working. The stand-in for the report has subsequently left EP. We contacted EP and were initially informed that there was no capacity. However, after I sent the report highlighting failures to meet EP's requirements, further analysis of only existing data has been allowed at the last minute. It confirmed pretty much all the issues raised were correct. However, EP has not been given time needed to do a proper review or garner any missing information or redo any assessments, only to condition, which is totally inadequate given the emissions contradictions and erroneous data. Despite providing references of cover reductions in emissions much less than the 90% quoted by Redmond's, for an engineered floating cover for odour and toxic gas. Environment Protection simply did not have real time to challenge to use 60% or below, quoted in many other places, including environment impact studies by the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology and people selling these covers. I sent 2 reputable links, but the 90 has been used, so we did some investigation into this figure. Redmore Environmental, who did both the air and border reports, paid for by the applicant, which we have had to correct multiple times. They indeed state 90% as a blanket figure for the reduction of emissions for an engineered cover. They use this data to reduce odour emissions by a factor of 10. This comes from the Sniffer ER26 guidance 2014. The document bases its figures on a report from the University in Ontario 2006, English and Fleming, which actually quotes 60%, not 90. 60 to 78%. So their own report, when you follow it through, is incorrect. The 90% is far more sophisticated, engineered, pressurized dome covers. So their own reference it goes from 60% to a maximum of 78. That this must be rectified immediately. Using 60 rather than 90 for reduction increases odour emissions by a factor of 400%. This would take odour on our property to 6.52, which Redmond's own report would be rated as significant in the cover on. Sorry.
Right, can you just wrap up there at that point, please?
Okay. There are many other errors which there are errors throughout. It's assumed that the cover will remain on at all times and never be removed. And none of the Environment Protection Officer made a list that was required of the design elements of the cover. So he asked for how the pumps would work on the top, whether the pipes would be in, whether there'd be vents or whatever. None of this was provided by mistake. And I have raised this in a report that I circulated to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Wyman. Thank you. Maybe turn to your seat, please. Thank you, members. You will have heard the information passed this evening by the speakers. Just ask the officers to come back on what's been said. Thank you.
Yes, so I'll start with the initial point. So I think the first one with regards to some sort of alarm system is sort of the damaging. I don't think realistically we would have any way of controlling that through a condition. I mean, any permission given would still need to be subject to building regulations. But no, we wouldn't be able to basically condition that as sort of alarm system like that. In regards to monitoring, one of the proposed conditions is for odor noise management, so we would have to condition that. In respect of considering other locations, there's no planning policy that requires the applicant to provide any sort of sequential test in where they would like to place the lagoon. So in essence, we have to assess each application on its own constraints and merits. We can't ask for them to provide a list of other possible locations as part of the submission. Regard to security and safety, there's no public right of way directly adjacent to the site. There is one nearby, but it is some distance from the lagoon. But more than that, there would be a security fence around the lagoon to stop people entering it or getting close to it. The actual cover to be used on the lagoon. So following the additional comments provided by the environmental health team, they've suggested that commission is attached to any permission so that they submit the exact details of that cover to the local authority, and that will go back to the environmental health team for consideration. In respect of in respect of flooding, when we look at the flood maps, we are relying on the ones provided by the Environment Agency. So it's not to say there hasn't been flooding in the past, but it falls within flood zone 1. Like I said previously, it does fall within a low chance of surface water flooding, but these matters in terms of potential runoff and pollution taken up by legislation which is set those controlled by the planning department. In respect of consulting on revised information, when we did receive the revised noise nodal assessment, we didn't consult residents on that information. We don't normally take that approach with technical information. We simply pass on to the relevant consultees for inspection.
It wasn't that, was the errors in the application. Corrected.
Yeah, again, in respect of sort of noise, you know, from the development, another condition is for construction and environmental management plan to be used. So that would control issues such as traffic movements throughout the site, as well to ensure that you know, vehicles can use the main accesses from the farm, which you can see on the block plan, rather than having to go past nearby houses. Yeah, I think that's covered most of the room. I'm up to. I'm sure you've heard it clear, so
Thank you, Charles. I understand some of the frustrations in terms of acknowledgement of the flood zone risk. I'm well aware of the some of the issues that affect the area in terms of flooding, and that's constantly been a thorn in the highways department of the county council. But we have to go within the remit of what we've got here available today. The flood zone has been recognised as flood zone 1. Until that is changed by the flooding team or the appropriate legislation, we have to work within the parameters of that. So I'll now hand it over to the committee, please, debate. Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask officers if they believe that the application has been reviewed thoroughly by environmental health, or whether they think it has been rushed through or not. Thank you.
We wouldn't be bringing an application before the committee unless we were satisfied that it had been thoroughly assessed by the appropriate consultees. So we sent consultations out initially on the application, and we received comments from the Environmental Health Division, raising no objections. So on that basis, we moved forward to make a recommendation and prepare the report for committee. It was on receipt of additional information that we took the decision to have a further conversation with environmental health, and because the previous officer that had commented had left the authority, there was another officer that we spoke to, and he considered it thoroughly. I would say he spent several hours looking at it.
Can you not pull out from the audience, please?
As I said, he spent several hours considering it because I know that he did for a fact, and he provided us with his recommendations, which were that he agreed with the initial comments from his colleague, but he did believe that some additional conditions would be beneficial. So officers considered those conditions and felt that it would be appropriate to add those, and so the supplementary report was circulated to members with those added into the recommendation. So yes, and that's your question. We're absolutely satisfied that our colleagues in environmental health have considered the application thoroughly.
Want to come back on that?
Yeah, would the application benefit from further in-depth review from environmental health, or do you feel that it has had the sufficient amount of time? I'm guessing you feel it has, based on previous report.
I do feel that it has sufficient time. Two different officers, professional officers, have commented on the application, and both have concluded that they have no objections subject to the imposition of conditions. And that's what we're recommending.
Councillor Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, there's some interesting questions here, but I think we need to think about some fundamentals as well. I mean, the first one, as I see it, is that I've always taken it as a basic point of planning that it's not for us to tell applicants what they must do, but for us to show why what they propose is wrong. In other words, we may feel that there is a better place for this thing, but that's not for us to decide this evening. It's to decide whether what is proposed is wrong rather than it's preferable. I'm assuming, and I looked to our officers to confirm this, that there are building regulations around the construction of a slurry pool in this respect, in terms of the way that the thing is lined itself, the integrity of the walls and such like. And again, I just like confirmation that that is not really a planning consideration this evening. That's a consideration of building regulations, and this would not be allowed to proceed were those regulations not conform to. My other question is about the issue that's been raised, the proximity of the structure to water and such like. Am I correct in thinking that it's the Environment Agency who is the expert body, so to speak, who sit in judgment on this? And am I correct in saying that from the report, as I read it, the Environment Agency has not raised any objections in that regard? I'm not an expert in this, and therefore I seek guidance from those who are. So I'd be interested to know what the answer to that question is. Sure.
Yeah, so the first point, you're absolutely right. In regard to building regulations, it was still need to pass that, even if planning permission was approved. They are two separate regimes in that respect. One doesn't necessarily guarantee the approval of the other, so it would need to have both planning permission and building regs given forward. With regards to the Environment Agency, they have come back and said they've got no objections. There may be other licenses or permits they need from the Environment Agency, but we can't control those from a planning point of view. They would need to be controlled by the Environment Agency themselves, their own legislation.
Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Nurse.
Can I ask about the cover that's actually going over this? And I'm understanding that it's like a tarpaulin in the shark cover. And if it is, then what my question is why would it not be like a hard cover that would seal anything in anyway? And it would also be safer for the slurry and for anybody who should happen to wonder where it is.
Gotcha.
Yes, to be honest, I'm not sure what the reason behind why it's not a solid cover is. There might be some purpose behind it. But what we would do, if permission was granted, would condition the exact details of that cover to be submitted to the Environment Health Team to be considered. And if they were happy with it, they could actually just do whatever it might be, or refuse that condition if they feel it's appropriate. But those exact details that we want to place in condition in the sense to make sure that it's appropriate. But I think in regard to sort of safety, those kind of matters, the fencing and the actual earth mound around it is sort of deterred from going near it.
Charles, any other points? Absolutely.
Why can't we have that guarantee now? I put it down.
Right.
Sorry. If they are going to put the cover on, why can't we have that guarantee now that it's going to be passed before they actually buy it? To be quite honest, I'm not happy with this now, I'm not possible.
I mean, it's a part of the proposal. It would definitely always have the cover, but I suppose our Environment Health Team just want to make sure it's as suitable as it possibly can be. So it might be that it's not enough details provided in the application to satisfy the Environment Health Team's concerns in that respect. So they want to see those final details. They obviously presume that it is acceptable in some form, but they want to see the final details for approval.
Consent for that. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't agree to this met because to me, I'm not an engineer. But I've seen a lot of these slurry pits and boards throughout the country. And then I've seen them in concrete size, concrete base. This to me, to all the substance, is flimsy. Galpobing, you know, you put in a fish pond, and yet they're expecting machinery to go in there. So I'm not happy with actually the construction. And that takes you on to the contamination of the river Lee that's been, as any evidence that it has, fallen into the contaminants that fall into the river Lee from this farm and then down to the pond in Maydew. And I'm concerned with that those environmental issues. I think in this day and age, we ought to be able to better construction to all this substance than this proposed. So I certainly don't agree with the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor John Williams. Any other members wishing to speak on this matter? Is anybody else wishing to contribute to the debate? Councillor Chris? Thank you.
Yeah, but just in regard to construction details, they would really be more covered by building regulations rather than planning in terms of the exact sort of how it's constructed. Yeah, so it's not something that I could advise on.
Thank you. Are members in a position yet to formally propose or support or decline this application at this point? Is there any further guidance? Any councillors wishing to make a proposal?
I propose that I'm against.
United.
Sorry. I propose against the development.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Ryan.
I was only going to add that I appreciate what residents are saying and what Councillor Williams and Councillor Williams are saying, but as of yet, I haven't heard a reason that we can refuse yet. Whilst I appreciate everything that I'm hearing, I just don't hear anything that we can pin it on. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. You're quite correct. Councillor Williams, have you got a definitive reason for refusal? Please support your proposal.
I'm just not convinced at all, and it probably won't be a planning. I'm just not convinced this firm are willing to, this farm or developer is willing to do his best for the area, to be quite honest. And I don't think we've been given a good enough case. We haven't got enough information. It's all the environment we've said here. I think we should have had an environmental officer here tonight.
So let me for clarification then, Councillor, you're saying insufficient information to make this determination at this point.
I do, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Fear, not Councillor Fear, Councillor Chris.
We've had a lot of information about the safety of slurry, but I don't think any of us on this side are an expert side. But if you were going to not pass it, we have to have a good reason, and the reason seems to be the is within the building regulations, not within the planning proposal. So what would it be that we just don't trust building regulations? It doesn't seem like a sound reason to dismiss it.
Councillor Chris, Councillor Fear.
No, it's really to reiterate what Councillor Chris has just articulated, that if we're going to refuse this, I mean, there are many things in this world that we might find distasteful, but that's not to say that they are wrong. It's not for us to suggest where this should go. It's for us to say why it should not go here, and we need to provide a definitive reason for that. Now, I don't see that the Environment Agency, who I believe are the authority who oversee these things, have given concerns for this at this point. We've heard about flooding, but we've also heard about the zone it's in. I haven't heard that the local flood authority have raised any concerns about this. Equally, I don't think any of us here are in a position to challenge building regulations. It's building regulations saying this is the way something should be constructed, that is the way it should be constructed. And those things can be checked as this structure is constructed. So in that regard, I struggle to see what grounds there are to vote against this. And I think, we ought to realise this. I think we are wide open to an appeal against that on the grounds that any rejection here so far, as I've heard, will be ill-founded.
Thank you for that contribution, Councillor Spear. The councillors wishing to make a proposal, the reason. I think I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Spear at the moment. I haven't heard of anything that you can actually substantially object to. This is a valid reason that wouldn't be overturned to appeal.
Chairman, am I allowed to speak or not?
No, you're not. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Even if we could provide a reason.
I think just really to reiterate what Councillor Beard has said, that if members were to refuse the application, that reason for refusal has to be very specific and it has to be substantiated. We need, so if there was an appeal against that decision to refuse, the council would have to substantiate that reason for refusal with evidence. So first of all, the reason for refusal needs to be specific. It needs to make reference to how it is contrary to development plan policies. And we've not heard any of that yet. We're not able to be influenced by how an applicant may have behaved in the past. We can only look at the application that we have before us. And as has been said, we're not required to say why other sites may be better than this one. We are only required to consider the application before us. And the technical consultees that we have consulted with have all said that they have no objections subject to conditions. It's also important to emphasise that we shouldn't be refusing something if we feel that the imposition of conditions can overcome our concerns. So if we can ask for additional information via condition, then that really means that we shouldn't be refusing the application. So I think I would just advise members that if you are looking to move a refusal, it needs to be very specific and, as I say, make reference to how it is contrary to development plan policies.
Councillor Julian.
Can we put a condition on it saying that we want a sealed hard cover on it so that there won't be the risk of this overflow of it, shall we say, or flooding on it, or is there any way we can go something down that route?
We could only do that if we were absolutely certain that that is appropriate, and we don't have the knowledge to know whether that is something that can be achieved or is appropriate, which is why we're recommending a condition that requires submission of the details of that, which means that the experts, which is our environmental health colleagues, can then comment on whether the details that have been submitted are acceptable. And if they feel that something that's more substantial, more robust would be preferable, then we can ask for that at that stage. But I don't think now we should be so specific to state that it has to be something in particular.
Councillor Lockhart.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the concerns that were raised by public speakers earlier in the meeting and some of the concerns that have been raised by members are more appropriate for us to put to environmental protection officers than to our planning officers. Can you, Chair, advise, or can our officers who are in the room advise what possibility there would be in the circumstances where we were to defer this application to the next meeting, that we might get an officer qualified to answer some of those questions in front of us? Because if we will not be able to secure an officer of that nature, we may as well reach a decision on this tonight.
I think that if members were requesting this to an officer from the Environmental Health Division be present, then that's something that can be arranged. But your officers here tonight are satisfied that those officers have considered the details sufficiently and have made their recommendation to us that they have no objections subject to conditions. So, which is why we feel confident in recommending to members that that the application be approved, but subject to those conditions. But yes, in answer to your question, I'm sure that they would come along.
Thank you. Thanks to Councillor Holland. Trying to go along with what our officers have said, just in terms of securing an officer and taking on board your point that we may be still in the same position, an officer being here and repeating verbatim what's already been said. I'm not minded to go down that route at the moment. Thank you for your contributions. Councillor Fear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to pick up something which I think came from the response to Councillor Burnett Faulkner's comments. If we are worried about the nature of the topping, so to speak, of this structure, if it is conditioned that that's one of the details that's there, presumably we can be securing in fact that if our environmental health team think that it's more appropriate to have a more solid top to this structure than otherwise, that condition in effect means that the application would only go forward if the applicant was then to comply with what these with what our team said. In other words, for me, again, this is a detail which can be determined as is appropriate by experts, and I would not wish to challenge these people at all, because I simply don't know about this. What we have in front of us this evening is things like the location of this thing, and as I say, my understanding is that it is not for us to say we think this is the ideal position, you must have it there. It is for us to show that what is proposed in front of us is wrong. And I am not hearing from any of what I've heard from either the team in front of me or the people who've been consulted in the report that that is the case. And in that respect, I still don't see what grounds there are to object to this application.
Thank you, Councillor Deere. Councillor Williams.
Mr. Chairman, with the point on the building and materials used post development, we have somebody from building control actually come or evidence that these built to spec, this lagoon is built to spec, and it's been built in other areas, and it's been secured, and there's been no leakage. But actually, it's a secure building. So somebody's an expert, none of us are experts in that. I'm sure the planning officers try the best in the environmental officers. But really, we want to be, in my view, we want to know about that construction of that particular lagoon, but I still feel it's flimsy, and it will not tell the material that it's built to contain. And just make that point as well. We're living now in torrential rain, storms that we've never seen before, many years. Global warming. So really, that should be added into the equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I take the point that can't be speculative in terms of what could happen. I'd love to be in that position and probably be able to get the lottery numbers, the Euro millions. I think if that's a power that's bestowed upon me. I'll just ask officers to come back on that question, council audience, because I don't think that that is a reasonable request to ask, because we'd have to apply that to every single application that came forward. Bearing in mind, we don't have a building control officer on site, but council, we have to rely on outside building control. Maybe that's something that possibly could change in the future. I'll just hand you back to officers now, just for clarification on that very point.
Yeah, I think notwithstanding whether we have building control officers at this council or not, it would be inappropriate for us to request that they came along and commented, because that's totally outside of the remit of the planning system. Building regulations will be considered separately alongside planning. So if we were to write planning permission tonight, the applicant would still need to seek the approval of the building control. So in making a decision on the planning application, we shouldn't and don't need to be involved in the building control matters, because they are covered by other regulations.
Any other council wishing to contribute something different to the conversation? Thank you, Councillor Holland. I do hope you will.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak again, Chair. I have heard what members have said. I'm aware that Councillor Mrs Williams earlier advanced a proposal to refuse this application on the basis that there is insufficient information available to us. She hasn't attracted a seconder for that, and no other member has come forward, including Councillor Mr Williams, to suggest that that's something they wish to press to vote. I have every sympathy with the people who've spoken tonight, certainly the public. I'm delighted to see Councillor Whitmore, newly elected, here already representing all of the people she's spoken to calling against this application in the course of her, at the moment, very brief career as a borough councillor. Some of the things that have been mentioned tonight are squarely outside of the remit of this committee as the planning committee. And I hope that members of the public listening, and also members who are going to be voting on this application, have formed an appropriate idea in their mind of what it is that's open to us to challenge, and what it is that we have to rely on outside organisations to enforce. Like many members of this authority, I have very little confidence in the ability of the Environment Agency to regulate, for example, because of well-known issues elsewhere in the borough. Unfortunately, that is not on the table for us to decide tonight. Some of the things that I've heard are of concern. I have heard that there is a flooding risk in the area, despite this forming not being part of a flood risk or an area that is of exceptional flood risk, according to the maps that other people again produce. Clearly, none of the flooding events and the contamination events that have occurred in the past can be related to this, because this proposal isn't in situ. Nobody tonight has suggested to me that the application in front of us will make that worse. What I think has been suggested is that because slurry will be collected in this location, if a lagoon is provided, that in the future, a flooding event could be seriously much worse on the basis that material could then leach into the environment. That, again, is not for us to decide. We are deciding on planning principles whether this is appropriate development or inappropriate in the location that's been presented to us. On that basis, Chair, I move the recommendation as printed.
Thank you for that, Councillor Holland. I'll take the proposal to refuse first. I can't support that going forward. There's no evidence to the contrary would support a valid support of that proposal. In the absence of the seconder, that's fair. Councillor Holland, you've formally proposed that we move this application based on the reasons you quite clearly and articulately gave the committee. Do I see a seconder to Councillor Holland's proposal? Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think Councillor Holland has articulated probably better than I can the reasons why I would be minded to support this application. Again, I've heard no planning grounds for formulated reason to refuse this application. And regardless of whether we think it ideal or not, that is not what is at stake. What is at stake is whether we can show that this should not happen. And I hear no evidence that that is the case.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. So we've had it formally proposed and formally seconded that we approve this recommendation based on revised recommendations contained in the supplementary report. Can I see a show of hands, please, in support of the recommendation? Can I see those against? Any abstentions? That item is clearly passed. That item is approved. Thank you.